Okay, so this first problem, it is a classic test given in coding. So the task is simple. We want to print numbers from 1 to 100, but we want to print fizz if the integer is divisible by 3. We want to print buzz if an integer is divisible by 5, but we also want to print FizzBuzz if an integer is divisible by 3 and 5, right? So let's take a look. Take a look at some code. Create a new file. Let's call this FizzBuzz. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do, we want to create a for loop, right? Because we want to generate a number, or we want to generate numbers between 1 and 100, right? So we're going to create a for loop. Let's say for num in range number, we could insert more than one parameter inside of a for loop. Two parameters. The first parameter is going to be our start, right? So we want to start from 1 and we want to end at 100. So we say 101, right? And so let's just make sure that our for loop is working. So we're going to print all of the numbers. I'm going to include this onto my left. Sorry, my right. There we go. So we see that we generated numbers from 1 straight to 100, right? But with the FizzBuzz, we want to output. That's it. Okay. Okay, for each number, we want to check if it's divisible by 3, if it's divisible by 5, or if it's divisible by both 3 and 5. And so an example of a number divisible by both 3 and 5 is something like 15, right? So if we have 15, we actually want to say FizzBuzz in the place of 15, right? So if the number is divisible by 3, we want to print fizz. If the number is divisible by 5, we want to print buzz. If it's divisible by both, we want to print FizzBuzz, okay? So what we could do next, we could check. We can create a conditional statement, right? We could say if num is modulo or divided by 3, and if that returns 0, okay, all this means is if the number divided by 3 returns 0, meaning no remainder, then that means it's divisible by 3. So we would want to print fizz, okay? We could say we also want to check if the number divisible by 5 returns 0. We're going to print buzz. So we're going to say elif num modulo 5. If that is equal to 0, then we want to print buzz, right? So we also want to check if that number is divisible by both 3 and 5. So we could say elif again. And this is where we use the logical operator of AND because we actually want to combine conditions. So I'm going to say elif modulo 3 is equal to 0 and num modulo 5 is equal to 0. Then I want to print FizzBuzz, right? And so let's run our program. Let's see what we get. Actually, I'm going to print num, and I'm going to print fizz on the side of it. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's run our program and see what we have so far. So we run. See that we get 3 is divisible by 5. Sorry, 3 is divisible by 3, so we get Fizz. Okay. 5 is divisible by 5, so we get Buzz. Let's check, how about 12? 12 is divisible by 3, so we get Fizz. What about 45? 45 is divisible by 5, so we get Fizz. What about 15? 15 we're also getting Fizz. And this is why this is a common interview question, because a lot of programmers, when they see this interview question, they get tripped up on where to actually place these LFs and these ifs, right? Because if you notice that, okay, so what Python does, it reads the program line by line, right? And it's going to check if num is divided by 3, or if it's divisible by 3, then it's going to print fizz. So by the time it reaches 15, it already read that we actually want to print fizz if it's divisible by 15. So it actually never checks for this, because this is already true for 15. Okay, if everyone understands what I'm trying to say. It's never going to check for this conditional statement. So once we get to line 15, this line is already being true. So it's never going to print FizzBuzz, right? So here's what we want to do instead. We actually want to print, or we actually want to put FizzBuzz. We actually want to check for if the number is divisible by both 3 and 5. We want that to be our first conditional statement, right? So we're going to say num modulo 3 is equal to 0 and num modulo 5 is equal to 0. Then we want to print FizzBuzz, okay, because we want to check for that condition first. So then we could say elif num divisible by 3. We want to print fizz, okay, elif num divisible by 5. We want to print buzz. Alright. Then if we could just include an else, you don't have to, but I could just print a regular number. Okay. So if we run our program, oh, let me print num. So let's run again. Now we can see that 15 is equal to FizzBuzz. 45 is also equal to FizzBuzz, right? Because it's checking for this condition first. If it checks for this condition first before our two logical operators, then it's actually going to print fizz. So we need to check for both conditions first before we check for the singular condition. Okay. And so let me include some comments. I'm going to say checks for both 3 and 5 divisible. Okay. Okay, and that is lab exercise FizzBuzz.